Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is the prayer and spiritual life of Dr. Martin Luther King, and we're fortunate to have with us to talk about the prayer and spiritual life of Dr. Martin Luther King, Dr. LBaldwin, one of the most prominent individuals dealing with the life and times of Dr. Martin Luther King. And of course, Dr. Baldwin, you know, as well as our audience, that you've been with us, just many times.
Many times.
Goes way back.
Always
back down that very 80s. And so you're back with us again, and we're delighted to have you here.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And to know the topic that you're dealing with here, because I think that this is an unusual approach to Dr. Martin Luther King. And I think that you have with you today a couple of the books.
That's right.
Of the many books that you have written, and we'll have you to talk about those books when we talk about your background, education, and your experiences. Here you are here with us to talk about the prayer life and spiritual life of Dr. Martin Luther King. But let's talk about the scholastic or the book life of Dr. LBaldwin in a real sense, to talk about some of your scholarship and some of the things that you've done in reference to Dr. Martin Luther King that will again create the situation of having to be here because you're the man that has all the information. Let's talk about it from that perspective.
Let me first say that I grew up in Camden, Alabama, which is part of the Alabama Black Belt. I grew up there during the Civil Rights Movement, participated in some of the demonstrations, etc. And I was inspired by that kind of experience to do research on the Civil Rights Movement, and particularly the life and thought of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. I matriculated at Talladega College from 1967 to 71, majored in history, minored in political science, and from there, of course, to Crozer Theological Seminary in New York. And of course, I completed the work for the PhD at Northwestern. And while at Northwestern University, I studied the life of Dr. King very intensely and became very interested in writing books about his life. I published, actually, my first 2 articles on Dr. King in 1984. So this, I think, is 30 years of research and writing about the life of Dr. King. So I guess that's what I can say. I was inspired very much by his leadership, by the King-led civil rights campaigns throughout the South, and also by Dr. King's thirst and interest in the intellectual life.
You know, today the topic is the spiritual life, prayer life, and spiritual life of Dr. King. Let's talk about it from that perspective. Exactly what was and how would you define what you consider to be Dr. King's prayer life and his spiritual life?
Yes, I think first of all we begin with his sense of the meaning of prayer. Dr. King understood prayer as conversation with God, communication with God, to use the language of the folk tradition, ringing up heaven. So that, and he had a very energetic prayer life. Dr. King prayed daily. He prayed in jail cells, as you recall. He prayed in church, in the streets, during street demonstrations. So he had a very energetic prayer life, and he believed that prayer is a part of the spiritual journey that each person must take each day of our lives. We wake up in the morning, we have a sense of some power that is higher than we are, and we try to connect in some way with that power. So this prayer life for him was a vital part of the spiritual life, that larger phenomenon that we call spirituality.
And so when you look at Dr. King's prayer life, what are some of the things that you think that our audience ought to know about that prayer life?
I think people need to understand that he took prayer very seriously. He believed deeply in the possibilities of prayer, the potentialities of prayer. He also had this biblical sense that God answers prayer. So he was very much in the Christian tradition in that regard, and very much in the black prayer tradition as well. So I think we need to look to him as a model for how to take prayer seriously, how to make prayer a part of our daily lives, our daily experiences, because prayer should be connected to everything we do. Spirituality is that large. Prayer is a part of spirituality, Dr. King said. He also said that nonviolence is a part of these spiritual disciplines that he associated with prayer as well. So I think we need to take seriously the need for daily prayer, to make our spiritual pilgrimage one that occurs daily. I think that is important.
Very good. Of course, Dr. Baldwin, let's take this first commercial break, and then we'll pick up with this information. And we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break.